Today will be part 5 in the series Scriptures Often Forgotten. And today we're going to be going over a very interesting topic. It's going to be on the topic of food and war. Once again, this is titled Food and War. And because this is a Truth Network, we use the restored names of the Father YAHUAH and the Son YAHUSHA, read from right to left, and the Ruach HaKadosh, commonly known as the made apart spirit, and Yahuwah as the restored title. Now, this is a very interesting and timely subject, as you're going to see coming up. But again, the subject is food and war, and we're going to be looking at different passages, and we're going to be talking about the Yahudyth of these two words. And the question that we're going to be thinking about today is these two words synonymous somehow? And if so, how is that the case? Now, we're going to be looking at our foundational verses and passages today in Yahukanan, John chapter 6, verses 1 through 58. Now, note the timing of this, because we're at an appointed time, aren't we? Very interesting and suspicious indeed. But now we're going to read part of this passage together, where it says, "After this, Yahusha went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee," or Galil as it's commonly known. Now, other passages, they have another part that's added to it, but that part was in parentheses, meaning it was added in there and it was inserted in there. So, of course, the original translation did not have that added part where it talks about the Tiberias Sea, or it mentions Tiberias. That part was not in the original translation, hence why it's not here. Verse 2 says, "And a large crowd was following him because they saw his signs that he did on those who were sick. And Yahusha went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his taught ones," or commonly known as disciples. Now, it's interesting that this occurred around an appointed time for them, because it says, "And the Passover was near, the festival of the Yahudim. Then Yahusha, lifting up his eyes and seeing a large crowd coming toward him, said to Philip, 'Where shall we buy bread for them to eat?'" Now, this is the word I want you to really pay careful attention to. The word we're going to be focusing on today in this passage is the word bread, and also the verb here where it says to eat. It's a reason why we're going to be focusing on that, so I especially want to turn our attention to that. So verse 5 says, "Where shall we buy bread for them to eat?" So again, bread, eat, bread, eat. And this he said, trying him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 pieces of silver worth of bread is not sufficient for them, for every one of them to receive a little. One of his taught ones, Andriah, commonly known as Andrew, the brother of Shamuth Kappa, or Simon Peter, said to him, "Here is a boy who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fishes. But what are these for so many?" And Yahusha said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, and the men, numbering about 5,000, sat down. And Yahusha took the loaves, and having given thanks, he distributed them to the taught ones, and the taught ones to those sitting down, and the same with the fish, as much as they wished. And when they were filled, he said to his taught ones, "Gather the broken pieces that are left over, so that none gets wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with broken pieces of the 5 barley loaves that were left over by those who had eaten. Then the men, having seen the sign that Yahusha did, said, "This is truly the Nabiah, or prophet, who is coming to the world." So again, this is the part where Yahusha feeds the 5,000. Then Yahusha, knowing that they were about to come and seize him, that they might make him sovereign, withdrew again to the mountain alone by himself. And when evening came, his taught ones went down to the sea. And having entered into the boat, they were going over the sea toward Capernaum, or commonly known as Capernaum. And I truly believe that this is the area of so-called Cape Town. But moving on, and it had already become dark, and Yahusha had not come to them. And the sea was rising because a great wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 5 or 6 kilometers, they saw Yahusha walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were afraid. And he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." So this is the part where Yahusha walks on water. They wished, therefore, to take him into the boat, and at once the boat was at the land where they were going. On the next day, the crowd that was standing on the other side of the sea saw that there was no other boat there except that one into which his taught ones had entered, and that Yahusha had not entered the boat with his taught ones, but his taught ones went away alone. But other boats came from the Sea of Galilee near the place where they ate bread after the sovereign had given thanks. Therefore, when the crowd saw that Yahusha was not there, nor his taught ones, they themselves also entered into the boats and came to Capernaum seeking Yahusha. And having found him on the other side of the sea, they asked him, Rabbah, which means my teacher, or commonly known as Rabbi, when did you come here? Yahusha answered them and said, Truly, truly, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were contented. So again, it mentions bread here. Do not labor for the food that is perishing, but for the food that is remaining to everlasting khaYAH, which the Son of Adam shall give you. For the Father, YAHUAH, has placed his seal on him. So they said to him, What should we do to work the works of YAHUAH? Yahusha answered and said to them, This is the work of YAHUAH, that you believe in him whom he sent, or have amunah. So they said to him, What sign then would you do, so that we see and have amunah, or belief in you? What would you do? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness, as it has been written, he gave them bread out of the Shamayim, or heaven, to eat. And you can see more of this in Shamuth, Exodus 16:4. We're going to go over that, as well as Psalm 78:24. That's where this is precepted from. Verse 32 goes on to say, Therefore Yahusha said to them, Truly, truly, I say to you, Musha did not give you the bread out of the Shamayim, but my Father gives you the true bread out of the Shamayim. For the bread of YAHUAH is he who comes down out of the Shamayim and gives khaYAH, or life, to the world. So they said to him, Sovereign, give us this bread always. And Yahusha said to them, I am the bread of khaYAH, or the bread of life. So we see that Yahusha is the bread. He who comes to me shall not get hungry at all, and he who believes in me shall not get thirsty at all. And we know that we saw this in the Passover account, that what? That we are to take of his body that represents what? The flesh of Yahusha, and what? The blood symbolizes the wine as well. So we see how symbolic this is and how it points to Yahusha, how the appointed times point to Yahusha as well. But how does this relate to the appointed time that's upcoming, or that's already begun in some parts of the world today? We're about to find out. Verse 36 says, But I said to you that you have seen me and still do not have amunah, or belief. All that the Father gives me shall come to me, and the one who comes to me I shall by no means cast out. Because I have come down out of the Shamayim, not to do my own desire, but the desire of him who sent me. This is the desire of the Father who sent me, that all he has given me I should not lose of it, but should raise it in the last day. And this is the desire of him who sent me, that everyone who sees the Son and has belief in him should possess everlasting khaYAH, or eternal life, and I shall raise him up in the last day. Therefore the Yahudim were grumbling against him, because he said, I am the bread which came down out of the Shamayim. And they said, Is not this Yahusha, the son of Yahusap, whose father and mother we know? How is it then that he says, I've come down out of the Shamayim? Again, because they did not understand symbolically what Yahusha was talking about. They were just only understanding with their natural eyes and not their spiritual eyes. But then it says, Then Yahusha answered and said to them, Do not grumble with one another. No one is able to come to me unless the Father who sent me draws him, and I shall raise him up in the last day. It has been written in the Nabiayim, or prophets, and they shall all be taught by YAHUAH. Everyone then who has heard from the Father and learned comes to me. Not that anyone has seen the Father except he who is from YAHUAH, he has seen the Father. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who believes in me possesses everlasting khaYAH. I am the bread of khaYAH. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and they died. This is the bread that comes down out of the Shamayim, so that anyone might eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which came down out of the Shamayim. If anyone eats of this bread, he shall dwell forever. And indeed, the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the khaYAH of the world. So once again, we see that the bread that Yahusha is talking about is himself, is his flesh. But what else does bread symbolize in the Yahudyth from a Yahudyth Hebraic understanding? Let's keep going to find out. Verse 52 then goes on to say, The Yahudim therefore were striving with one another, saying, How is this one able to give us his flesh to eat? Yahusha therefore said to them, truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the son of Adam and drink his blood, you possess no khaYAH in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood possesses everlasting khaYAH, and I shall raise him up in the last day. And I kept mentioning that, reiterating the millennial reign. Remember, we did our videos on the rainbow videos and how the last day symbolizes that purple, or the purple color. You can learn more about that in Hosea, Hosea 6:1-2. That's where that's precepted from. The last day symbolizes what? YAHUAH Shabbat. He's the sovereign of the Shabbat. Or again, a day is like 1,000 years unto him. So he's the sovereign of the millennial reign, and that is his Shabbat, when he will tabernacle, dwell with us. And it's just interesting that tabernacles is considered the last appointed time. Out of the 7 appointed times, there's that 7, again, completion, and the 7th one, the symbolizing the purple color. Purple symbolizes royalty. If you would like to learn more, you can take a look at our rainbow videos where we talk more about that. But verse 55 says, for my flesh is truly food, and my blood is truly drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood stays in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I dwell because of the Father, so he who feeds on me shall dwell because of me. This is the bread that came down out of the Shamayim, not as your fathers ate the manna and died. He who eats this bread shall dwell forever. So again, we see how this is very different from the manna account, as we've seen in Shamuth, Exodus chapter 16. We see that when it comes to Yahusha, his bread is everlasting, eternal. And of course, what bread is he talking about? He's talking about his Dabarym through Ra. He's talking about his word, his instructions. That is the bread that he is talking about. The first 5 books of scripture, and also having Amunah, belief in him, and just his word, period. What he tells us and instructs us to do. That is how we can have what? Eternal khaYAH. So now we're here in Shamuth, Exodus chapter 16, verse 4. Also, I don't know if you noticed, but I also put the Yahudyth notation, how you would write it in the Yahudyth over here, just so that you can see it. For those of you who are learning up and brushing up on your Yahudyth, that is how you would say it, and that's how you would write it down in the notation. This is 16, and that's verse 4. Shamuth, that means Exodus. That is how it's written. So the verse itself says, and YAHUAH said to Musha, see, I am raining bread from the Shamayim for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, in order to try them, whether they walk in my Thurah or not. So once again, this was considered a test. And again, if you would like to read more about the manna account, you can definitely do so on your own time. You can read more of that in Exodus chapter 16 altogether. And also, if you would like to get more context on Yahuchanan or John chapter 6, you can definitely do so on your own time and read that chapter to its entirety. However, what I mostly wanted to get to with this video is this word right here, because remember, the topic is food and war. Food and war. So here we are at lakama, lakama, lakama. That is this word right here. It comes from Strong's H3899. That means bread. So the word means bread itself. So anytime you see bread in the so-called Old Testament, it's referring to lakama. Now the word can also mean food. It can also mean verb to eat. So to eat something. It has 296 occurrences in the so-called Old Testament. Now it uses these 3 letters. So when we give the Yahudyth breakdown, the first letter, because remember it goes from right to left. The first letter is staff, or lead, or to lead. The second letter is a kat, that means fence, wall, or separation. The first letter is a lam, or lamed, as it's commonly known, or lamad. And then the third letter is a mam, and that means water, chaos, or nations. Now remember, the waters can also symbolize nations, as talked about in Kazun Revelation 17:15. Now, when you put this word together, you get a very interesting definition. So you get staff, wall, waters. Staff, wall, waters. When you just put it all together, when you literally put the actual pictographic definition together, the literal definition, you get staff, wall, waters. Now, why is that so important and profound? Because it's symbolic of what? It's symbolic of the first Exodus, the parting of the sea of reeds. Now, why is that the case? Because remember, staff and lead, didn't Musha have to take a staff in order to part the waters? That's what Yahuwah instructed him to do. And didn't this happen during an appointed time? It happened during the Passover unleavened bread season. Very interesting and suspicious indeed. Didn't we just read in John chapter 6 how all of that occurred around the Passover time? Very interesting and suspicious indeed. So again, the pictographic of the word lakama, or bread, food to eat, it gives us a definition that takes us back to the first Exodus, that's reminiscent of what? Parting of the Sea of Reeds. Because remember, the staff that was given to Musha that led our people through the first Exodus and led them out of Egypt, what ended up happening? Yahuwah separated our people from the Egyptians. How did he do that? By parting the waters, by parting the Sea of Reeds, and then our people were able to pass over through dry land so that they were able to cross and get to the other side. And then of course Yahuwah used those same waters to what? Drown the other nations, to drown the Egyptians, to drown out all of our enemies. And we know, symbolically speaking too, that there will come what? A second greater Exodus, as talked about in Yeshayahu, Isaiah chapter 11 verses 11 through 16 as well. But then we see something else that's also very interesting about this word lakama. So we see that it's staff, wall, and waters. However, we see how Yahusha, his staff, separates us, or is the wall, from the other nations or waters. So when we have the bread of khaYAH, or the bread, lakama, who is Yahusha, when we have Yahusha on our hearts and our minds, and when we're keeping amunah, belief in Yahusha for eternal khaYAH, or eternal life, and when we're keeping his law, statutes, and commandments, because remember, his word says, if you love me, keep my commandments. So when we're doing that, and when we have Yahusha on our hearts and our minds, he is the one who separates us from these other nations. He separates us from chaos, and he keeps us separated from the chaos when we have his word, the bread of Yahusha, on us and upon us. So how does he do this? With his word, his bread. That is the bread right there, his word, through Ra, keeping his law, statutes, and commandments, observing the appointed times, keeping Shabbat, getting away from these holidays, getting away from religion, getting away from the ways of the world, separating ourselves from the world. No, that does not mean crawling into a box somewhere, but it simply means allowing Yahuwah to use us in order for what? For us to be a light unto the world. How can we do that unless the light is in us? So that is what it's about. And his word says that his word is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. So we see symbolically that's what this word means. However, that's not the only place where you see this word, because this word can also mean fight, battle, war, as noted in Strong's H3898 with 177 occurrences. So that word lakama, this word right here, lakama, 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 it can also mean war, fight, battle. It's the same word that is used interchangeably. So it can either mean food, or it can also mean war. It can either mean bread, or it can mean battle. It can mean to fight, or it can also mean to eat. It is the same Yahudyth word. Now, of course, the Jewish, they're going to lie and tell you that, oh, because of nikud and vowel pointing, that they're two totally different words, that with two totally different meanings and two totally different definitions. But that is not the case. And we've already gone over how the Jewish use the nikud vowel pointing to add and take away and confuse the language and confuse the pronunciation. So we don't have to go into that right now. However, it's important that you understand and realize that that same word lakama can also be used in context to fight, battle, war. Here are just a few places that I noted where you see this word fight or lakama once again in scripture. Again, you can reference it right here in Strong's H3898. You can go on there in your own time to reference these references as well. And you can check out Strong's H3899 in terms of food and to eat and bread for lakama. You can do that on your own time. But here I just chose three passages right here. Shamuth, Exodus 14:14, where it says Yahuwah does fight for you and you keep still. So when Yahuwah says he fights for us, that word is lakama, lakama, to fight. Dabarym, Deuteronomy 3:22, do not fear them, for Yahuwah your Allah himself fights for you. So again, you see that again, it's the same word lakama. And again, you can look this up on your own time. And also Dabarym, Deuteronomy 20 verse 4, where it says, for YAHUAH your Allah is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. So again, that word fight is lakama, lakama, lakama. Food and war are the exact same word in the Yahudyth. Lakama, lakama, lakama. They are the exact same word, the exact same meaning, and they are used interchangeably. And that's very important for you to understand in this video today. But where do you see bread associated with an appointed time? Because is that word bread or lakama, is it associated with a specific appointed time, such as the one we're about to observe or the one that is around this time? Let's find out, because now we're here in Uyakra, or Leviticus 23, 9 through 22. In the passage that talks more about the appointed times. However, in context and precept speaking, we're speaking specifically on the first fruits and when it comes to the Feast of Weeks and Harvest Festival. And that's why I re-uploaded the Harvest Festival video on here, the Scriptures Often Ignored video that was done in so-called 2019, so about 4 years ago. I re-uploaded that on here just so that you'll be able to have reference to it, so that you know what we're talking about. But it goes on to say, and YAHUAH spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the children of Yasharal, and you shall say to them, when you come into the land that I give you, and shall reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the Khan or priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before YAHUAH for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Shabbat, the Khan or priest waves it. So this is talking about in context towards unleavened bread. And on that day when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb a year old, a perfect one, as a burnt offering to YAHUAH, and its grain offering 2/10 of an apah or ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to YAHUAH, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Yahuwah, a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And from the morrow after the Shabbat, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Shabbat. Excuse me, meant to put an H right there for Shabbat, but why is that so important? Because remember, we've gone over this extensively in how many of our Harvest Pentecost videos. For those of you who've been with the channel since so-called 2017, and maybe even before that, you know that we've done several videos on the Pentecost and that word Pentecost, how the deception behind that word Pentecost, why that word is incorrectly, erroneously used for this appointed time, and how this appointed time is better known as what? The Harvest Festival or the Feast of Weeks. Now remember, we also went over this word count in that video too. Sapar, count 7 completed Shabbats. Until the morrow after the 7th Shabbat, you count 50 days. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to YAHUAH. So again, remember, it is 2 counts when it comes to the Harvest Festival. It's not just that one count. It's not just counting 50 days and that's it, like we've been taught before. It's 2 counts, as we see right here. You have to count 7 Shabbats, and then you have to count an additional 50 days. And that is why we arrived to the day that we arrived to around this time for the Harvest Festival. I know people have asked me about that. And again, we've done videos on this subject. So again, if you would like a more extensive review of what we're going over and why it's 2 counts instead of 1, and why we observe the Harvest Festival, the Feast of Weeks, commonly known as Pentecost, why we observe it in the summer and not the spring, you can take a look at that video that was just re-uploaded today, actually, on the Harvest Recap. I go over more of that extensively on that subject. But again, this video specifically is talking about bread or food and war. Verse 17 says, bring from your dwellings for a wave offering 2 loaves of bread of 2/10 of an apah of fine flour they are, baked with leaven, first fruits to YAHUAH. And besides the bread, you shall bring 7 lambs a year old, perfect ones, and 1 young bull and 2 rams. They are a burnt offering to YAHUAH, with their grain offering and their drink offerings, an offering made by fire for a sweet fragrance to YAHUAH. And you shall offer 1 male goat as a transgression offering, and 2 male lambs a year old as a shalom or peace offering. And the Khan shall wave them beside the bread of the first fruits as a wave offering before YAHUAH. Besides the 2 lambs, they are made apart to YAHUAH for the Khan or priest. And on the same day you shall proclaim a made-apart gathering for yourselves. You do no servile work on it, a law forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, do not completely reap the corners of your field when you reap, and do not gather any gleaning from your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am YAHUAH, your YAHUAH. So isn't it very interesting and suspicious indeed that we see the word bread coincided with the harvest festival or the feast of weeks, as we just saw in verse 20. That word bread right there is what? Lakama, lakama, lakama. Verse 18, that word is lakama, 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 bread or food. The same word in the Yahudyth that also means war or battle. So isn't that interesting how the word bread or food also means war, battle? Isn't that interesting? Because again, for as far as end times is concerned, didn't Yahusha tell us in his word about the end time harvest? Didn't he tell us about the wheats and the tares to leave them until it's time for harvest? Didn't he say in his word to leave them until the harvest? And then at the time of the harvest, he will tell the reapers to gather the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them, but to gather the wheat into his granary. So we see that. You can read more about that in Matthew chapter 13 to learn more about that. But I just thought that was interesting that, again, the word bread or lakama, and when it comes to talking about the appointed time specifically, is coinciding with the harvest festival. And this word also symbolizes and means war, battle, to fight. That during harvest, he even tells us that until the harvest, that come that time during the harvest, that it will be fighting, war, battle. Because when Yahusha comes back, didn't his word say that he's coming to bring a sword? Anytime you see the word sword in scripture, it's referring to war, a battle, lakama. And Yahusha's the one coming back. Well, he just told you that he's the bread of khaYAH, that he is lakama, that he's also war and battle. Doesn't his word say that he's also a man of war? It tells you this in Shamuth, Exodus chapter 15, verses 3. So again, we see how it is paralleled. We see how it coincides that, again, bread and war go together. Food and war go together, and how they coincide with the harvest festival specifically. Now, isn't it interesting that during this festival, we are to bake 2 loaves of bread with leaven? So for those of you who are observing the harvest festival, again, we're going to be observing starting tonight into tomorrow night. Now, depending on where you are in the world, this might have already begun for you. If so, have a wonderful Barak harvest festival and a Barak festival of weeks. But for those of you who are observing around this time, it is very important that you remember to bake 2 loaves of bread with leaven, because that is what the commandments instruct us to do for this appointed time. And again, if you're wondering what to do during this appointed time, how to observe it, how we go about observing it, you can also take a look at that video. Once again, the harvest video recap video that was re-uploaded. It was a scriptures often ignored video, because we talk about more on what to do during that appointed time and how to observe it. But it's also very important that I make note and mention that you are to bake 2 loaves of bread with leaven during this appointed time. Why do we do this? Because it reminds us of his commandments as well. Remember, the 2 loaves of bread, it symbolizes the 10 commandments that were written on the 2 tablets of stone during the time of Moses. So again, it's a reinstitution of his law, statutes, and commandments. You can also read Acts chapter 2 to learn more about this appointed time and the miracles that occurred during this appointed time as well. And you can also read more about this appointed time when it comes to the golden calf account and what our ancestors were not supposed to be doing around this time. So remember, his word is also bread. His word is also war. It is interchangeable. When he says he is the bread of khaYAH, he is also what? Fighting for us. War, battle, bread to eat, food. Doesn't his word also tell us that that man does not dwell by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of our Abba YAHUAH? And we know that Yahusha is YAHUAH in the flesh, the only begotten Son of all. So we see that he is the living word, the word made flesh, just like his word talks about. So it's very important that you see this and realize this with both your eyes open. And prayerfully through this video, I pray that you have a better understanding as to why YAHUAH instructs us to bake the 2 loaves of bread with leaven, why we are to do that for this appointed time specifically indeed. Because we are reminded of his commandments. Now, if you remember from the other video, remember these 3 Yahudyth words are interchangeable. Summer, harvest, grapes, and grape gathering. And again, we talked about this in the harvest video. So please, if you're wondering what I'm talking about, or if you're new to this network or don't really understand, please see the harvest video to learn more. The harvest video is the one that was just re-uploaded onto this network. Please take a look at that video so you can learn more about these words. Again, this is more understanding and more Yahudyth understanding as to why the harvest festival or the festival of weeks is kept in the summer and not the spring. Why it's kept around this time of year and why it is not around the end of May or so-called the beginning of June as the Jewish commonly observe it with their so-called Shavuot. So again, it's very important that you have that understanding, and it's important that you see again from a Yahudyth Hebraic understanding how these words are interchangeable. Again, what they're going to teach you is that in the English, oh, summer harvest grapes, those are 3 totally different words, they're 3 totally different meanings, but in the Yahudyth, that's not necessarily the case. So again, you can take a look at the video to learn more about that. Again, we go extensively into detail about these 3 words and about their Yahudyth meanings. However, as we also just see today, that what? That as we just learned in this video today, these 2 Yahudyth words are also interchangeable. Food, war, food and war, and they mean lakama. Lakama, they have the same Yahudyth word. Food can also mean bread to eat. War can also mean battle to fight. In the Yahudyth, they are the same thing. Lakama, lakama, lakama. It is the same exact Yahudyth word. Now, it's also important for me to note this, that the word bread is not the same as unleavened bread. So when you see unleavened bread in scripture, especially even in Leviticus 23, that word is matzah. Matzah. It can also be matzuth for the plural. But the word bread itself, lakama, is not the same. These are 2 totally different words, as we've noted right here. Bread is lakama, that you can find in Strong's 3899. Unleavened bread is matzah, that you can find in Strong's 4682. It's very important that I distinguish the 2 of these things because they are 2 totally different things with 2 totally different meanings. They do not have the same meaning. They are totally different. So prayerfully you understand that, prayerfully you see that, and again, you can note the Strong's references and you can look up these things on your own time. For those of us who are observing the harvest festival, commonly known as the festival of weeks around this time, I pray that you have a wonderful Barak, lovely festival of weeks, harvest festival, and a lovely time indeed.